Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show that discusses any and all topics under the sun that are of interest to women worldwide. Here's Nadia Giordana.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Nadia Giordana. Our guest today has been through some experiences that for the average woman would have been too much to bear, but not her. She's gone on to have adventures and become an author living in New York City. Let's go meet her and hear more about this compelling story. Take it away, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Nadia. What an exciting guest we have today, Torah Bontrager. I am so glad you're with us. And before we start asking you questions, because I think we do have some interesting questions for you, I'd love to have our esteemed panel introduce themselves. We have quite a group of talented and successful women, which is always a treat to be around. So who would like to go first?
I'll start.
Thank you, Candy.
I'm Candy Pettiford, and I'm an author and a motivational speaker.
Thank you, Candy. Anne, how about you?
Yeah, and my name is Mckenna, and I do a few things. I am an author. I am a clinical chaplain. I am a professor and a founder of an orphanage, an organization in Kenya that educates children.
Great. Thank you, Anne. And Melissa?
And I am Melissa Nambangi. I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota African Women's Association, a nonprofit with the mission of promoting the health and well-being of African women and their families in the Twin Cities.
Thank you, Melissa. And I'm Barbara Lavalor, and I'm an international photojournalist, and I have just completed my memoir as well. So I am very interested in hearing from you, Torah. First of all, wow, you have led an amazing life. And I know that each of us has a question, but perhaps you could just set the stage for us and tell our viewers a little bit about your book and you and why you wrote the book.
Sure. Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me. It's a huge honor, and I'm really excited because I know you have some questions that I've probably never been asked before, so I'm looking forward to that. So in terms of the memoir, I wrote that several years ago. It's called Amish Girl in Manhattan. Thank you. So you can see the girl on the cover is me. That's the only photo I have of myself in Amish clothing because Amish religion forbids cameras, including family portraits. That was the day I escaped that at age 15. And then what was your other question that you wanted me to?
Well, you could say just a little bit about the area, the states where you grew up, and why you wanted to leave the community, and you can take it away from there.
Okay. I was born traditional Amish in a small community in the Midwest in Iowa, actually, and then moved to Wisconsin when I was 3 and Michigan when I was 11 or so. So I've had only small community experiences in the Midwest. I'm not from Pennsylvania, Ohio, or Indiana, which are the most popularly known Amish communities, and also the oldest. When I was in the 8th grade, I cried that on graduation day from Amish school, because I knew I would never be allowed to go to school to learn again after that, unless I managed to somehow escape from the religion or resign, depending on the situation. And in terms of Amish education, for those of you who don't know, the Amish were granted an exemption from compulsory education in 1972 in the Supreme Court case Wisconsin v. Yoder. And that case was intended to apply to only practicing Amish population, but because once you decide something, you create a law about it, then that also gives anyone else the same exemptions if they want to point to Yoder as a precedent for that. So that's a shorter way of saying anyone in the U.S. Can claim religious exemption as a reason for not sending their child to school. They can also say it's against my religious beliefs for my child to learn how to even read, and that is a right that Americans have under federal law. It does, of course, that doesn't that right negates a child's right to learn, for example, and we can get into all of that if you want, but I just wanted to set that as the stage for why I needed to escape literally in the middle of the night at age 15 in order just to have a chance to go to school beyond the rudimentary education I had gotten.
And Torah, there were some other traumatic experiences that drove you to leave. I think our audience should probably hear at least a little bit about that.
Yes, I did not have a good home life at all. The experience I had was being abused physically, verbally, psychologically, emotionally, the whole gamut, including sexual abuse, while I was a child growing up. And I was not sexually abused by my parents, but I was abused in school by older teacher or school children. And then when I escaped, I reached out to two uncles who had also left the Amish church for help. I thought, I would be able to go to a safe place and have a place to stay and be safe. And then those two uncles started raping me within the first month. I stayed with one uncle the first semester, then moved to the second uncle and his family for the second semester of high school, because I thought, okay, I'll be safe there. He has a wife and children, whereas the first uncle didn't. I was all alone in this big house in the middle of nowhere in Montana with a population of 100, literally a population of 100. And so I thought, okay, I'll be safe with the second uncle. He has a family, wife, kids. And as soon as his wife went on an overnight business trip, he did the same thing. And at that point, I thought, oh, that's just what uncles do, I guess. And so that was my introduction to life outside the practicing Amish community. It was like jumping out of the fire into the frying pan. And there was no organization or set up to where I could go that was a safe organization to help me transition. Which is why I created the nonprofit Amish Heritage Foundation, to be that resource that I didn't have. And there's also, in terms of the broader, American mainstream culture, like lawyers, legal aid societies, nonprofits who help with domestic violence and sex trafficking, they're not trained in how to provide services to what I call Amish refugees, because we really literally are having that experience. We're native-born Americans having a refugee experience. And so that's one of the huge initiatives of the nonprofit, is to train others who can be that liaison and advocate for those inside the communities or wishing to leave.
Thank you, Torah. Candy, do you have a question?
Yeah, first I'd like to say, Torah, I admire you, and I am just so glad that you are telling your story. It's wonderful. Getting a little bit back to my story is my brother lived in Wisconsin, and believe it or not, he's African American. He became the first honorary Amish man. He would help them build their barns. And when he passed away, the Amish people showed up in droves to his service, his funeral. And as I was saying to Nadia, they had a three-legged dog that they would bring, that dog just loved my brother. But the thing I wanted to know is that true that when you leave, you are actually like you're dead? Your parents no longer talk to you, nobody responds to you. And then also, how do you reach out to those who, like you, would love to get away?
So the first question about, are you really treated as dead? That really depends on the community and the individual, parents, family members. So in terms of the religion, you can't excommunicate someone who hasn't been baptized. Excommunication is only applicable for baptized members, but unbaptized members can be shunned. So it's a technicality. And
what about you?
I was unbaptized. I knew that I needed to get out of there before I was forced to get baptized. That's another myth we can get into later about having a choice. And the reason for that, why it was important for me, other than I couldn't ethically take the baptismal vow, was that I knew that being unbaptized, that would then open the door for anyone in the community, any of my relatives, cousins, whoever, to do business with me. I can't be excommunicated because I wasn't baptized. I can be shunned. One side of my family does not want me around. I'm not welcome for the most part. Whereas the other side of the family, depending on who it is, but largely the cousins I grew up with, and even my aunts and uncles, they all love seeing me. Now, I still am a threat if I come around too often. They don't want their little kids or seeing me too much, because that's still a threat to them. But they remember me as a kid, and so there's this sentimentalism that's attached to it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Torah.
I have a question.
Yes, Melissa.
Okay. I was wondering how growing up, we know that when you're growing up within a community, your values and all you know about life is what you learn in that community. So I'm wondering how you got that awareness to want to go to further your education, to reject some of the practices that you didn't, that were abusive. So I just want to know, how did you develop that awareness being in such a closed community as you were?
I was very different, number one. I just say I was born differently. So I had all these questions that most kids didn't have. I was very curious, and I wanted to know how planes fly, for example. And I don't know how many kids ask that. And I loved reading, and actually looking back at what I discovered through writing my memoir was that actually reading had served as a coping mechanism for me because of the abuse and neglect. I sought escape through a better life, a better sort of like comfort through reading and imagining a better life. And I was lucky to have access to books that not every Amish child has. It, again, is going to be dependent on what kind of community you live in, what they allow. And I went to school from first through fourth grade in a community that allowed classical American, British books, children's books, like Boxcar Children was the first book I read, that series. Anne of Green Gables, Little Women. There's a whole lineup of others that I read, and those were carryovers from the public school education that Amish children got before 1972, where they transitioned to mostly private, Amish private only schools. And my mother and her side of the family were avid readers as well, and they actually valued education, and that's where I got the love for reading from, was from my mother.
Mhm. Thank you. Anne, did you have a question?
Well, first of all, I'm truly amazed, and the whole fact of being different is awesome. I identify with that, and with your organization, how number one, how much of the kids come for help there, or the women, and what do you do? How do you help them?
The way that we've been helping people is through outreach, going into the communities and doing, you know, some workshops or evening talks, things like that, but also online. So mostly our outreach has been, since, you know, the pandemic, of course, was online, but even before then, just being on social media and writing blog posts. Somehow our website ranks high on Google when people are searching for these kinds of things, and we will get calls, you know, from people, text messages, things like that, who want our help. This unfortunate a part of that, which it's one of the things we're trying to rectify, is that most of the people who reach out to us are males and not women who are still inside the community, because the men are allowed to have access to technology in a way that women don't, depending again on what community they come from. And usually the people who reach out to us are, of course, going to be on the liberal end and not on the conservative end. And where they will have cell phones that they can go online with, that now has internet access, or they might work at a business that has computer access, internet access, and they'll be able to jump on that and reach out. In terms of the women, the way that it's worked out so far is people, non-Amish people inside the community who have Amish clients or concerns about practicing Amish women, they have found us in that same way and will reach out to us for help. And so what we've seen in the past like 3 years is that it is the model for us going forward is to provide the training for those people who aren't Amish but have the trust of the women inside the communities, and let them be the liaisons. Because this is another thing, even though I speak the Amish language and I understand the customs and traditions and everything, I'm still a threat if I go into the communities. If I do it myself, or anyone from the Amish Heritage Foundation tries to go in there, it's better, more efficient, and faster for us to just connect with the doctors and social workers and other people inside who aren't Amish.
Do you get threats
Yes.
for?
Yes, we have there are benign threats and then more serious threats, you know, where you know, I've struggled a lot in the beginning of worrying about my safety, physical safety. And I'm not as concerned about it anymore as I was, but in the beginning, but I won't go, depending on what I'm doing inside the Amish community, like making a trip there to on a, you know, to handle or help with a crisis situation. I have a license to carry a concealed handgun, and I will carry it because it's actually necessary. I'm out in the middle of you know, a rural area and with no cell phone signal, depending on where it is. And I don't necessarily have the support of law enforcement. That's another thing we can talk about. And, you know, even the social workers that we work with or other advocates for Amish women, they carry guns as well, concealed guns, just because of the problem with sexual assault and rapists. That's really the threat.
So Torah, there are so many questions we could ask you. I mean, you in your book, you're learning how to fly a plane in Kansas. The book talks about you being in Manhattan. You in the next page, you're meeting the Dalai Lama. I mean, my goodness, how did you get from one place to the other? And I'm very interested in hearing about that Dalai Lama experience, and also in Dubai with the royal family. I mean, my goodness.
That was something that I've always wanted to do as well. It was one of my dreams, was to travel. I wanted to travel to every country, including going to outer space. Not something that most Amish kids think about, but that goes back to an earlier question about how did I know about the outside world. We had one globe sitting in the classroom Amish school, and I memorized all the names of the countries and their capitals. And that was how I got that. And so I decided that I was going to become a pilot, because that would be a practical way of being able to afford flying. And I got my private pilot's license. It's called a certificate, not a license, when I was 18 years old, going to college, my freshman year of college. And then realized that I was not going to be able to figure out how to afford the astronomical expenses of training past that, and that was not going to be a future for me, at least not in the foreseeable future. And so I dropped out of college for several years and was working for a corporate aviation company that managed corporate pilots' flight schedules around the world. That's how I learned about Dubai, for example. And one of the captains that I spoke to one day, I asked him, what's in Dubai? And that's what I would do every time we got calls in. They wanted flight support, getting whatever they needed for their trips, permits. That also shrunk the globe very quickly for me. So that was how really the globe then became this tiny, doable thing to handle. And he encouraged me, you should go to Dubai and visit if you get a chance. It's not what Americans think it is. Women, at least American women, Western women can go to the beaches in bikinis. So I thought, I got to experience that. And I had a friend who worked for a commercial airline, and I would get buddy passes from. And that was how I was able to afford flying internationally. And so I took as many trips as I could, including the Dalai Lama one. That was also where I learned about the Dalai Lama, was through the aviation company that I was working for. Because one time we got a call in from a pilot who was going to fly this lady to see the Dalai Lama in India. And this was definitely one of, the VVIP clients. And my colleague said, oh, she was all excited about this and how important this is, and, how much care and attention has to be put around planning this flight. And I asked, who's the Dalai Lama? And she looked at me like, what rock have you crawled out from, And the sense I got from her was that only like very rich people could see the Dalai Lama. And and at the same time, he was this humanitarian and did all these good things. And I thought, well, if he's such a humanitarian, such a good person, then why wouldn't he see me? Why couldn't me, lowly, poor Torah, see him? And I told my colleague, well, I'm going to go meet the Dalai Lama. And this was long before, social media, Facebook. We just had internet chat rooms then that were shady and all of that. But I somehow got connected to the right person who said, oh yeah, he lives in Dharamsala, and you would just fly into Delhi, and we just rent a car and go up to Dharamsala, and he has, open hours basically when anybody can come by and say, have a little chat with the Dalai Lama. And so that's what I did. But I didn't get to see him though.
Oh.
His schedule changed. Exactly. He left the day before I landed and wouldn't come back from until the day before I had to leave. And I had no more vacation time. I had no more, sick time or anything, I could not extend the trip by one way either day. So I didn't see him, but I got a really interesting, culturally immersive experience that was definitely not Western. And that was my first introduction to, non-Western culture.
Amazing, amazing. You are a graduate of Columbia University. That is quite an esteemed university. It's one of the top ones in the country. How did that happen?
That, again, goes back to my childhood dreams. I heard a little bit about Harvard when I was a kid. That kind of like seeped in from being around non-Amish clients of my father's, and I would overhear their conversations and picked up on that only the really smartest people in the world can go to Harvard. And I thought, okay, if I figure out how to make it out of here, I'm going to go to Harvard. And I decided to take the risk of rejection after, during my 3-year hiatus from college. I was very worried about getting rejected because I tied up all my worth around my academic performance, going back to, that was how the only thing I got praised about as a child was that I was smart in school. And so I couldn't bear the thought of rejection from Harvard. I took the leap, decided I don't want to live a life of regret and wonder what if. So I applied to Harvard, and then my backup school was Columbia. I looked at the other, I know that sounds like, what are you talking about? I'd never heard of Columbia, but I saw that it was in New York City, and I really wanted to live in New York City. I felt after, traveling to 20 plus countries within a 3-year period of time, that was where I would feel at home. And I always joke that Harvard rejected my application letter before they even got it. But Columbia, on the other hand, had the good sense to accept me. And so, I went to Columbia that fall crying because I really thought it was a second-rate school. And
No way.
yeah. And I'm sure my Harvard undergrad experience would have been wonderful, but I am really happy that I went to Columbia, and I found a home for the first time. I found where I belonged and people who embraced me and who accepted me for who I was.
Thank you, Torah. Thank you so much. Nadia?
I think our time is up today, and thank you everyone for being here. Candy and
Wonderful.
Melissa, Torah, and Barbara. And we'll see you next time on It's a Woman's World.